sound okay?
Yes.
Good. So it is a privilege to be in this wonderful place. I have very pleasant memories of this, but I do want to congratulate Mandeville on this gorgeous new space. I've given lots of talks over my long career, but I don't think I've ever talked any place. So I love it here, and it's a thrill to be asked to come back and talk to you. The theme of my talk, I've had a pretty active role. I'm a kidney doctor, and I've led various kinds of projects at the National Institutes of Health, where I've been one of the directors now for about 10 years. But a lot of my time and effort as a leader of research has been on human subjects research. The work I did here was, we did a little playing around with zebrafish and jellyfish, so my own science was not human subjects. But since I've been at the National Institutes of Health, I've had a role in the leadership of human subjects research. I'm a doc, and one of the things I realize about doctors is we're actually pretty bad at talking about uncertainty. And uncertainty is the starting point for clinical research. So I wanted to begin this talk with a couple stories of uncertainty, because I'm well aware that this is something my profession doesn't do a great job at. And in fact, on this topic, there's a fair amount of current soul searching. And I've chosen two stories of uncertainties to tell you here this evening. The uncertainties in debate about breast cancer screening and the uncertainties about statins to prevent heart disease. And I suspect that these are interventions of relevance to many of you, and interventions about which, in very thoughtful components of the medical profession, there is now very intense debate. That uncertainty is why we need precision medicine. So that's the case I'm going to make, or try to make to you today. The hero, in many ways, of the breast cancer screening debate right now is this man. This is H. Gilbert Welch, and he is an epidemiologist, clinical researcher at Dartmouth. And he has really shaken up the medical world with the term overdiagnosis. And I'm going to show you some quotes from his work and some of the data. This slide, it's got a lot of information on it, but it is worth spending just a few minutes on. What it shows, on the x-axis here, we have years from 1976 through 2005 for each of these graphs. And beginning in the mid-80s, the recommendations came along to do much more breast cancer screening. And as a consequence, the diagnosis of early stage breast cancer soared. That's that blue line. And this is the rate of breast cancer incidence in women over the age of 40. But the rate of late stage breast cancer didn't fall. And Gilbert Welch was the first to kind of drive home that point. If these early stage tumors were destined to become late stage tumors, it should have fallen. And it didn't. Now, the death rate from breast cancer has fallen a little, and the treatments have clearly gotten better. But and this is another piece of data, he has concluded that approximately 30% of the increase due to the introduction of widespread screening mammography are cases that he calls overdiagnosis. These are tumors that would never spread, and therefore we haven't seen a fall in the rate of metastatic breast cancer. This has been a very tough thing for people to swallow. Because, of course, all the people, and I know many of them, many women my age, many of my friends, feel that their early stage diagnosis saved their lives. And so we have a tough problem here. The first big randomized trial that looked at the impact of breast cancer screening was a Scandinavian study, a superb study. It enrolled about 30,000 women, randomized to either be screened or not screened. It's called the Tromsø study. And in Tromsø, and in all the Scandinavian cities where this data came out that it wasn't changing death rates, they said, well, we don't need to screen so many people. Women were furious. In fact, one epidemiologist has calculated that the risk that all the women were going by bicycle without helmets to the screening centers, and the risk associated with biking without the helmet was much greater than the risk associated with not having breast cancer screening. Now, so here are a couple of quotes from this is showing you what happened to large and small tumors. So the increase in tumor size was not, the new tumors found with wide-set screening beginning in the 80s are the small tumors. And a small portion of the small tumors will in fact metastasize, but the large ones the screening is successful because it is decreasing the number of large tumors. So this set of data tells us that screening is doing what it is intended to do. It is pushing the size of tumors to smaller ones. Here's some quotes from the Blair and Welsh work in the New England Journal. Unfortunately, the number of women in the US who present with this disease, only 25% of who survive for 5 years, appears not to have been affected by screening. We estimate that breast cancer was overdiagnosed, i.e. tumors were detected that would never have led to clinical symptoms in 1.3 million US women in the past 30 years. So this is a tough thing to talk about, frankly. It is tough to persuade people that maybe they were the overdiagnosis case. All of us know people in this category, but as physicians, we don't actually know which of those early small tumors are the problem cases and which aren't. And tumor size is at best a very crude manifestation of underlying biologic characteristic. Prognosis depends on underlying molecular features. So this is an example of a tough uncertainty that we in the medical profession worrying about research are struggling with, and struggling with how to refine our criteria for screening and our approaches to treatment. As I was preparing this talk, I was in Washington, and my husband is here on Mount Desert, and he called me and he said, be sure and pick up my lovastatin. I'm on lovastatin, and I need my lovastatin. And as I was preparing this talk, it occurred to me that lovastatin was actually another case in point of the theme I'm talking about today, about uncertainty. Jürgen is a healthy older person with a lipid profile that is mildly abnormal.
So we're foregoing all the HIPAA regulations.
Yeah, this and his internist, based on his slightly high LDL and slightly lower than optimum HDL, has had him on a statin for a number of years. But he's never had heart disease. So this is statin use for the prevention of heart disease in people who have never had a heart attack or stroke. This is another big area of uncertainty, actually. Now, statins are among the best studied of our interventions. The statin trials have, over the years, enrolled approximately 100,000 people in randomized trials in which statin users are compared with matched individuals who are not taking a statin. But the vast majority of those studies have done the trial in somebody who's already had a heart attack or a stroke. And only about 8,000 of those 100,000 have been for prevention. And in the prevention studies, it's kind of not so clean. So should you're going to be on a statin? Well, I have to tell you, I did get a statin refill. Our internist is putting on the statin. We're obedient patients. But in my heart, I don't know. The hero of this study, of this question, is, and the person who's written a lot about it is somebody whose input I think has been terrific in our profession. Rita Redberg is a cardiologist at UCSF and the editor-in-chief of JAMA Internal Medicine. And she has written, she would tell Jürgen that he doesn't need that statin. Here is a recent editorial she wrote, Statins for Primary Prevention. The debate is intense, but the data are weak. This commentary was issued in response to a recommendation by the U.S. Preventive Task Force, who did a summary and recommended statins for high-risk individuals who've never had heart attacks. But her reading of the data is different than the task force. And actually, the task force wouldn't recommend it for Jürgen anyway. But the task force did their usual careful job of reviewing the evidence. But the evidence for treating symptomatic persons with statins does not appear to merit a grade B or even a grade C recommendation. So it is now the norm in evidence-based medicine. We give grades, and the grades are like the grades people got in school. And an A is considered clear-cut evidence. B is not so good, and C is lower level. And her reading of the literature gives this a C. Exacerbating potential bias, all trials included were industry-sponsored except one. And an important point to make, the benefits of statins are greatest in individuals at high risk. So when you stratify all that data from randomized trials, you find that most of the benefit occurs for those people who are at higher risk. But the side effects occur across the board. And so that's the recurrent problem, is we are trying to balance risk and benefit. And often the risks are greatest for people at high risk, and the benefits are greatest for people at high risk, and the side effects occur across the board. So that's one of the current tough debates in my profession. That is the price of imprecision. We base evidence-based recommendations, which I am a firm believer, we base them on large data sets. And in many cases, we do not have the needed precision to improve the recommendation for an individual. And somebody, I think Susan gave a very good definition of precision medicine. But the goal of precision medicine is to be able to tighten those recommendations so that when we recommend therapies or diagnostic measures or preventive measures, we can do it with greater precision. One of the numbers that people use a lot in talking and thinking about this is the number NNT, number needed to treat. Surprisingly enough, many of the treatments, especially those used for prevention, you have to treat 100 to 200 people to benefit one. And the goal of precision medicine is to tighten that and to improve the rigor of those predictions. Treatment of advanced disease, the number needed to treat is often much smaller. So when we talk about the number needed to treat for metastatic breast cancer, we are talking about numbers like 3 or 5 for a new therapy. When we talk about prevention, however, like statins for somebody who's never had heart disease, the NNT numbers tend to be in the 100 or so. So this is an interesting website. It's somewhat controversial, but their reading of the literature is that breast cancer screening is not reducing death and is causing side effects. their reading and summary of the literature using standard quantitative methods is that statins do help prevent heart attacks. They do help reduce the rate of stroke, but they have side effects that we actually don't understand fully. In those large trials of statins, we have very consistent increases in the rate of development of diabetes, a still poorly understood phenomenon. And the rate of muscle damage, also controversial, but it is not trivial. So precision medicine is an emerging approach for disease treatment and prevention that will build the evidence that will allow us to better take into account individual variability. And it includes biological makeup, genes, but it also includes lifestyle, environment. It is a radical shift in how we hope to develop the evidence and enable people to make, and physicians and healthcare providers to make more precise decisions. Numbers matter. Good data matters. And if we are going to achieve this over the next decade, and there are good reasons to think it'll be possible, it is partly by having a much wider participation in the clinical research process. Now, I had the honor of being the first interim director, in addition to my day job, of a large initiative that has recently been funded and received continuation funding, even from this Congress, for an effort called the Precision Medicine Initiative. It was launched by my boss, Francis Collins, in 2015, and its goal is to drive research technology policies that will result in greater participation in research, empowerment of patients, and working towards the development of more of an evidence base for more individualized care. And now I'll give you just a very quick kind of infomercial about a program that will be launched in the fall that I think many of you may be interested in participating in, and I certainly plan to participate in myself. It is an effort to recruit 1 million or more volunteers that will reflect the broad diversity of the U.S. People will be asked to comply with HIPAA rules and to donate data about themselves to a central data repository. The data will inform a variety of research studies. Currently, there is a beta testing going on of this whole process at about 20 sites, and the national enrollment will begin in the fall. The starting point will be surveys of people about what their actual health is and permission to access their electronic health records. One of the real drivers for this new initiative is a recognition that the large healthcare systems where most of us get our healthcare have electronic records and formats that facilitate their sharing. For a long time, we've been sharing data that is used for billing, but this is aiming to actually obtain things like actual laboratory values, actual blood pressure measurements. Subjects, at least some portion of the subjects will have physical measurements, including blood pressure, weight, heart rate, waist circumference. Blood and urine samples are part of the protocol. The original draft was just for blood samples, but I'm a kidney doc, and I said, no, we need urine samples, and that won the day. And indeed, one of the things that's interesting about this is with the subject's permission, it is possible to be gaining information about, are you in a more polluted environment, or are you in an environment like this that may in fact promote mental well-being by capturing data about where people are if they give permission to do that. So the data types will grow and evolve with the science and hopefully with the development both of technology and trust. But those at the NIH are pretty excited about this major effort. We estimate that over time we'll be able to get much more quantitative estimates of risk for a range of diseases by integrating environmental exposures and genetic factors. We hope to identify the causes of individual variation in side effects of drugs in an area called pharmacogenomics. Many of these side effects of drugs do seem to have genetic markers that will make them more predictable. We hope to develop and test with real quantitative rigor markers that signal increased or decreased risk of developing common diseases. And by trying to capture and enroll people in inner cities, in rural communities, hope to get at some of the problems that lead to the enormous health disparities in our society. Study participants will get the data back about themselves. This is a kind of core principle. And it will create a platform that will enable people to be enrolled in larger numbers to targeted therapies. Two ways people will sign up for the study, either through healthcare providers, a very extensive network of healthcare providers, including a large group in Boston, a large group in California, a large group in Chicago, and the Kaiser Network are going to serve as the conduits for healthcare provider organizations. But we also are anticipating a way for people to volunteer directly and over time to go to sites to provide information about those studies. It's an opportunity to learn some of your own health indicators and your own data, an opportunity to contribute to the fight for disease and improving the health of future generations. An opportunity, potentially, we hope to ensure that the many diverse communities are included. So that's where precision medicine is at the NIH right now. All of us, if you Google it, you'll learn more about it, and I hope this brief preamble helps interest some of you in this, but I think it's a very important study. But I have told you a little about uncertainty and the price of imprecision. I did want to also show you a brief clip that reminds us of the promise of precision. I need to end this part of the show, and I have a blank screen with no end show. Maybe, Tony, you can help me. While Tony brings up my clip, I could take a couple questions. Dave?
So, Josie, it's actually terrific that you're willing to talk about these things, which we read about in the newspaper every day. So everybody knows about these things, and it is a dilemma, because the whole question of risk management is at the heart of this. And so, as a fellow taker of statins, should I be doing muscle biopsies and things like that?
Well,
how do you figure that out?
Right. Actually, we don't have a good answer for that. It is very clear that statins occasionally, as you know, Dave, a severe muscle condition called rhabdomyolysis. And when people are started on that, it is customary to screen for creatine kinase, which is an enzyme that allows you to detect it. Some of the clinical trials, and most of the clinical trials that have studied statins have measured creatine kinase. The trials that actually engage people on muscle symptoms when they begin statins show a much higher incidence of possible muscle damage. And Jürgen, my recommendation to Jürgen has been, okay, you're not seeing any muscle symptoms, so let's rely on symptoms when we worry about them. We are funding a trial that looks at an agent of statins lower CoQ10 in the blood. And so one idea that has surfaced is that CoQ10, the fallen CoQ10, may be part of the reason for muscle damage, and supplementing CoQ10 will test whether or not that hypothesis is right. in the setting of that trial, which is a few hundred people, muscle biopsies are being done. So I think we have a track, one track, to get at this issue. I will say that statins have a track record as pretty safe drugs. And this hint that there's maybe twofold more incidence of type 2 diabetes is a worrisome one. But these abnormalities in blood sugar are pretty common. So right now, this is an equipoise issue. This is one of our basic criteria for clinical research. This is a coin toss. And the point I want to leave you with is it's okay if there are things in our health that are a coin toss. But it is a good reason to want there to be research so that we get some of those coin toss issues resolved. But the criteria for a placebo trial is, or the two randomized arms should be, in the opinion of experts, in the opinion of ethicists, they should be a coin toss. And that's what I view about the statins right now for healthy people with only mild risk factors.
Anything that's individualized, in my mind, means a lot of time. Where's that time going to come from?
Right. So the commitment to the All of Us volunteers is a 10-year study. One of the most important observational data sets that all of us rely on is the Framingham study. Framingham study is now, I guess, 35 years old. And you're absolutely right. The value of these resources and the value of these data will grow with time. There are important and useful questions we calculate you can get at in 3 to 5 years, but the longer we have the data, the better. One of the strengths of electronic health records is many of the resources and programs that are enrolled have longitudinal records on people who will be enrolled, and with their permission, that longitudinal data can also be accessed.
Actually, that was a brilliant answer, but what I meant was...
Maybe it wasn't if I didn't answer your actual question.
I just meant that if you're doing individualized care of an individual, that kind of time. That kind of, now that there's so much...
I'm making a case for the research
exactly.
enterprise. I'm not going to pretend to stand up here and have any wisdom on the many defects in our healthcare system. And I certainly agree with you that one of the defects is that physicians rarely have the time to learn more about people and their personal lifestyle factors and risks. But I also think that one of the other changes happening in healthcare is people are more engaged. And the fact that all of you are here tonight to talk about this obscure topic is part of the engagement of people in their own care. And all physicians talk about how often their patients come to them having read things, but in fact, taking a real serious role in your own healthcare and being part of a dialogue that results in that individualization.
Well, healthy doctors will have more information to go on from the studies. Presumably, if the study is successful.
Right. Let me take just 3 minutes and show you a brief clip. This is where I work. This is the clinical center at the National Institutes of Health. Jürgen's lab is on the 4th floor. But this is a brief clip.
I was 33 at the time I went into Dr. Rosenberg's protocol. I knew that the cancer was spreading, and so I had started saying goodbye to people. I didn't think I was going to make it.
Linda Taylor was the 67th melanoma patient Dr. Rosenberg had treated. The 66 who came before all had died from their cancer. And while Dr. Rosenberg was constantly adjusting his experimental trial, there was nothing to suggest that Linda's fate would be any different. But she surprised everyone.
When she came back at a month, the multiple tumors that we could see growing in her body had not changed. And we biopsied one just to see if we could see what was happening inside that tumor. And astonishingly, when we looked at it under the microscope, all of the tumor cells were dead.
I went back home and Steve gave me a call and he says, we've got a dead tumor on our hands. And so I said, well, what exactly does this mean? And he says, I don't know. I didn't know whether it was a fluke, didn't know whether this was a miracle, and Dr. Rosenberg didn't know either. And so you could feel this tenseness when I would come back.
When she came back for the following month, her tumors were going away and they ultimately all disappeared. She had widespread tumor 30 years ago, and here she is completely tumor-free now. Oh, wonderful. Although I get to look at you every day. When you're doing something and you've never seen it work, you don't know if it ever will work. You don't know if it's possible to get it to work. But when you have one example, now you know it's possible.
Dr. Rosenberg, he would always say, you were the first, you validated it, you're part of history. I view myself as a stepping stone. There have been people before me, there's going to be people after me.
So this little clip is part of the Discovery Channel is doing a series on the NIH Clinical Center and on clinical research. We're kind of proud of it. And we're also proud of Steve Rosenberg, who was really the pioneer of something you're actually reading about in the paper right now, which is the development of targeted T cells for immunomodulatory therapies of cancer. And this is an approach which began about the time of this woman's initial therapy and is now beginning to be applied effectively and in larger scale based on rigorous randomized data to more and more cancers. These are therapies that are based on the actual molecular profile in the tumor and increasingly in part on some of the immunodeterminants in the individual's genome. And this is one of the most intense areas of research now. We're still, as Steve said in this video, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And when I saw this clip, I said, I'm giving this talk on uncertainty. This is a place in which uncertainty was so clearly acknowledged, and that is part of understanding disease and clinical research. So I thought it might interest you to see this. The Discovery Channel series has many more stories of discovery. It's going to start, I think, August 4th. There are 4 episodes, and I think they're going to be very interesting. So I'm glad to hear a few more questions. Go ahead.
So when I think of precision medicine, I almost always associate it with genome sequencing or exome sequencing, and I noticed that you didn't mention that at all, and I wonder what the thinking is, or how much that will be part of the all of us campaign.
It will definitely be all of us, but as we started going through a reasonably long process to develop this, we were worried about only being labeled, not just about genes, and when you actually do analyses of the various factors that impact on health, it's a factor, there's no doubt about it. Many disease entities are strongly familial. Drug side effects are almost certainly very often modified by genes. But lifestyle, environment is also. And so all of us very explicitly is going to capture a broader range of information.
Yeah, my question is about not so much what you said today, but what your role is at NIH. and it's about integrative medicine. And I'm wondering, where is integrative, holistic health, and then naturopathic medicine reach a point where it goes from scientific and evidence-based to faith-based? And what do you support and what do you think is just hokey?
Well, there's definitely plenty of hokey in healthcare. You only need to search the internet and you will quickly find entities that are a huge presence of hokey. The center that I lead, so I played several different roles at the NIH. I am the director of this center, which is the smallest of the centers at NIH. And, but I also take on various responsibilities, sort of I call them not my day job, for Dr. Collins, who I've worked with for many years. So my role in the Precision Medicine Initiative was a second job while the permanent team was developed to lead this initiative. As head of the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, I have worked hard to focus our research on those approaches that are amenable to rigorous science. And in fact, the data on the way in which the mind and mind-to-body approaches impact our health is strong. And we have increasingly focused our research portfolio on pain management. When we do look at the data for why people use acupuncture, chiropractic care, meditation, biofeedback, most of the time the indication that drives people to try these approaches is related to pain. And so our research has focused very strongly on the application of these approaches to pain. When we were created by Congress about 20 years ago, there was interest in studying homeopathy and a lot of interest in studying dietary supplements. We've actually never funded anything on homeopathy, but homeopathy, which is widely practiced in Europe, has been subject to quite a number of rigorous trials, but none of them have ever, NIH funds studies that go through a pretty rigorous peer review process, and homeopathy trials have never survived that. And in fact, the evidence from rigorous trials on homeopathic remedies is that they are not different from water. But the evidence that mind-to-body approaches, such as meditation or acupuncture for that matter, change pain, is growing and is reasonably strong and I think important. About 4 years ago, I guess it is, our name was changed by Act of Congress. Our original name was the National Center for Complementary and Alternative Medicine. But because so many of these practices were being used in a more integrated way together with conventional care, the people who were funded by us and the people who cared about us took on an effort to change our name. And so we only take on research on practices that show enough promise to be candidates for integration into conventional care. So that's a quick summary, but we can keep going on that afterwards.
Chinese herbal medicine, where for 5,000 years they've been experimenting. Some of it works great, and some of it may be the placebo effect. I was wondering,
well,
is there research on
one
that?
of the interesting things that comes out of a lot of the research is that subjective outcomes are highly influenced by expectation. That is the placebo effect. And so I know that the wine we were served here was open label. But I tell you, it's well known that if you package very expensive wines and less expensive wines, at least within a price range, the placebo effect of wine labels is well established. So expectation, particularly in subjective outcomes like pain, has a big impact. Acupuncture is an interesting example of that. acupuncture is a kind of irritative stimulus driven by needles, and this has been used in Asian medicine, a variety of kinds, for a long time. And part of it probably works by the effect of those irritative needling, they call this qi, on nerve pathways. But part of it clearly works by expectation. So it's complicated business. Yeah.
As a physician who went through medical school 60 years ago,
Uh-huh.
and then had patients who were using these alternative medicines, I didn't have a clue as to what they were talking about as they're discussing acupuncture and homeopathy and these Chinese herbs. Is any of this being taught to the physicians in medical schools now so that they can understand what their patients are doing?
Yeah. There has been support for the development of curriculum materials. We do prepare a lot of CME materials for people to use for continuing medical education as well. There's an academic group called Consortium of Academic Integrative Medicine Programs, and they have programs at about 60 medical schools and some curriculum materials and incorporation into the curriculum. My own view as a doc is that one really important component of a certain degree of openness to these health practices is patient empowerment. So I believe that the physician has to be a guide to the patient, has to warn them about things that are dangerous. But if someone comes in and says, gee, the acupuncture really helped my plantar fasciitis, it's not good to say, get back on the OxyContin. So I think that it really is important, and what I hope the materials we develop, which often talk about how small the effect sizes are, but is to be a little more open to people taking a somewhat more active role in these.
When I say acupuncture, I was thought of that as a placebo effect until I talked to a veterinarian who was using it on his dogs and cats.
Yeah.
How do we,
Right.
that's not placebo.
Right. Actually, interestingly, acupuncture. Right. Well, you do have to control for the trainer effect. So there may be a small expectation effect here. Acupuncture is actually used in horse races. It's interesting. Other comments or questions?
Questions?
Yeah.
How does the promise of precision medicine square with the economic drive for large pharmaceutical companies to sell a lot of drugs?
Well, the job of the public sector investment is to make sure that the funds that the taxpayer pays for are used for the public interest. And I consider that a really important mandate. And at times these interests are not aligned. Yeah, I'll come back to her.
Do you think you'll have trouble getting young people to sign up for this if it's 10 years and why not make it 20 years
Right.
if you can get young people?
Yeah, so it's a great question. One approach that will be tested is the enrollment of families. And so one way to begin will almost certainly begin with asking people if they want both grandmothers and grandchildren, and all three generations to potentially enroll. There is worry about attracting young adults whose lives are often too busy for, and perhaps not as engaged as all of us in health as all of us become as we get a little older. One of the hopes is that the mobile technologies, which will give people feedback, such as, did you know that people in your community are eating X, or other kinds of interesting apps will help maintain the interest of the younger generation. But it's a worry. And the real hope is, the real design of this study is to have target groups, one of them being age-based, the other is diversity-based, and to do targeted advertising to reach groups that are not signing up. So the investment will be targeted in outreach that hopes to balance and win. Gosh, I've got a lot of hands. Maybe I'll start in the back and then try. Go ahead.
When I think of precision medicine, I think of diseases in which you know the gene that's mutated that produces the disease. But when I look to see what's happened in terms of therapy, when you know the specific gene that's responsible, say, for breast cancer, the therapeutic advances seem to me to be
sluggish,
exceedingly small.
Yeah. You know, I work for Francis Collins, and Francis is, I don't know how much you've watched him on TV or other places. He is an enormous enthusiast that over time, genomic information will change how we think about disease. And on the other hand, there's two gaps that your question acknowledges. One is, do we know the genetic factor that drives this difference? And if we know it, can we and I think you're specifically asking about the question of the gap between understanding genetic mechanisms and turning that into therapeutic intervention. It is slow. It is tough. I mean, sickle cell anemia, we've known that defect for 40, 50 years. But there are now small molecules that may modify sickling. And so I think that is one of the uncertainties, is understanding and talking about how difficult it is to make that gap. Precision medicine is partly about improving prediction. It isn't just about improving therapy. It is improving prediction. So the two cases I talked about are cases where it is, our question isn't what causes heart disease. Our question isn't what causes breast cancer. It's how to know which of the breast cancers or which of the people at risk for cardiovascular disease actually going to have it. And I think that is an emphasis. It's a little bit different than the emphasis on understanding genetic mechanisms in order to improve treatment. But the question's a very fair one. Yes.
You mentioned coenzyme Q10 a while back with statins. In your personal opinion as a doctor, do you think that supplementing with coenzyme Q10 could have benefits to your health?
I think there is not adequate evidence to recommend CoQ10 as a supplement. And the balance of that, I am a bit of a therapeutic nihilist, so until the evidence is there, I'm not recommending it. So no, I do not think we have adequate evidence at the present time to recommend CoQ10 supplementation. Okay.
So you started your talk with this uncertainty about breast cancer diagnosis. I have a paternal cousin who died with breast cancer in her 20s. Our daughter was diagnosed at age 41 with her first mammogram. That was 2 years ago. When I heard the recommendation that mammograms should be now postponed till age 50, I was furious.
Yeah, but that is a recommendation that actually would not hold for somebody with high genetic risk.
But Katie didn't have that.
Well,
and I know several other, daughters of friends who are in that same position. So,
no, I don't disagree with you. This is a tough problem. But you also know many people who've gone through radiotherapy, mastectomies, who may not have benefited at all. So we just don't, the point isn't that we know whether or not the relative balance of risk and benefit for mammogram screening for people between 40 and 50. We just don't know. That's the point I'm trying to make. Not that we should, the USPTF made a calculation and came up with this risk-benefit ratio, and it would not apply to people at high genetic risk, and maybe Katie didn't know she had high genetic risk. Of course, now sisters and daughters will know. But the point isn't that we've got an answer for the 40 to 50 screening. The point is we do not have a basis right now for a strong evidence-based recommendation. That's the point. So I'm not defending the USPTF recommendation. I think it's an I don't know. What I am saying is research is important, and it's important as a healthcare professional. We'd be prepared to say often, we don't know. And that's the lesson I'm trying to interject here. There are people who haven't asked me questions. I think you haven't.
Because it is about the All of Us program. Is it important to include people who do not have health care insurance and do not have access to health?
It certainly is. Right. This is something that's been very intensely debated and thought about. And that is part of the reason for direct volunteer recruitment and for working with community centers in underprivileged and diverse communities to sign people up. One of the sites that we are using for enrollment are federally qualified health centers. And the FQHCs serve the healthcare needs of people who don't have insurance. And right now there are 40 FQHCs that will be participating, one in New Hampshire, one in Maine. And that is one of the strategies that is being used to try to meet what is, as you are right in raising, a very important concern. It's also recognized that in people with real constrained resources will need substantially more hand-holding to maintain participation and to develop approaches that aren't as reliant on computer literacy. You know, the health disparities, I think anybody who comes to me is kind of aware of this. This is a rural state. It's one of the places with incredible health disparities. And as a nation, I think we'll slowly start moving. But certainly our office is going to is going to put substantial resources in trying our best to address this. Anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask a question, we'll have a little bit of time afterwards to try these one-on-ones, but go ahead.
I know in your study you taught some of the urine analysis and
Right.
blood analysis, and it occurred to me that all this work being done with the microbiome. What about the fecal analysis? You know, about what the microbiome is doing?
Right. No, this is actually not solved yet. And the team worrying about the budget for this project is worrying about whether microbiome analyses should be done on a subgroup or a larger sample, and that decision has not yet been made. So and in fact, the blood and urine samples, there'll be a minimal data set, and then they will be aliquoted and stored, and researchers will submit proposals with ideas to pursue specific questions.
Do you take a statin?
No.
Do you know, or have you ever taken?
So I think this is a great audience. Thanks for your interest in this.